Happy Friday and welcome to another Methodist moment. I'm Pastor Matt here with you today. We're happy to be going through these series of Methodist ideas and Methodist thoughts these last several weeks, and we've got a few more planned for you. And so today, what we're talking about is we're continuing in this series. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the sacraments. Last week, Pastor Rick taught us about grace and gave us just a little bit about grace. And then this week, I want to talk about Christian perfection. This is sometimes called entire sanctification. It's kind of the end goal of what grace is, of grace working in our lives. And we call it Christian perfection. And as Christians, we don't talk a whole lot about perfection very often. It's not something that we like to think we can attain. Perfection seems so much of what God is and so much of not who we are, right? Perfection is just impossible. It's unattainable. It's difficult. It's challenging. It's only for God. But really what we find, and what's perhaps very unique to Methodism, but also is right there in Scripture, is that perfection is what God has called us to. Perfection is what Christ has called us to. It's right there at the very end of chapter 5 in the Gospel of Matthew. Christ is giving his Sermon on the Mount. He's in the middle of giving his Sermon on the Mount. He's talked about love, and now at the very end, the very last verse, he says, "Be perfect, therefore, as your Father in heaven is perfect." Right, that's where this idea of Christian perfection or entire sanctification comes from. And the idea is that in this life, in our human life, we can be entirely sanctified. We can be made perfect through God's grace. And what this looks like for us is it's not that we don't ever make any mistakes ever. It doesn't really even mean that we never sin at all. It just means that we are made perfect in love, perfect in God's love in this lifetime. And it's not easy, it's exceedingly rare. John Wesley, who kind of started with this tradition with the Methodist movement, he seemed to think that there were several saints who had achieved entire sanctification, achieved Christian perfection, and that there were even several during his life that he knew that may have reached Christian perfection. But he said it was very rare. He never said it about himself, never said it about his brother Charles, who wrote all those wonderful hymns. He seemed to think it was very, very rare. I do too. But it's something that we look forward to. It's something that we expect to come. And so John Wesley and his followers, and then the Methodist Church still today, when a pastor goes up for ordination, still asks, do you expect to be made perfect in this life? And we have to answer yes. Yes, we do, with God's grace. And so that's what we're moving towards, is Christian perfection, being made perfect in God's love. And I think the scripture here that speaks so well of this is the new commandment that Jesus gives at the Last Supper in the Gospel of John, when Christ is talking to his disciples and he says, love one another. Right? This is the new commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. There is no difference between Christ's love for his disciples and their love for each other. It's the same love, the same quality of love, the same amount of love, the same impact of love. The way that Christ loves us, we are now to love each other. And when we fully do that, when we are able to accomplish that, and that's no easy task, but to love one another as Christ loves us, that's Christian perfection. That's being made perfect in God's love. And that's how we understand Christian perfection here in the Methodist Church. We thank you for joining us for this Methodist moment. We'll be back next week with another one and for a couple more weeks to come. Have a good Friday.